They didn't see it coming. Neither did I. Honestly, not until I was already standing there in that courtroom, watching my father's lawyer shuffle his papers with that practiced confidence, the kind that says I've already won this before it started. And then he looked up. And everything on his face changed. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this actually began. I was 17 years old when my father told me to get out of his house. Not in a quiet, painful way. Not with tears or regret or any of the things you might imagine a parent feeling when they look at their child and decide she is no longer worth the trouble. He said it the way he said everything with absolute certainty. The way a man says close the door behind you or dinner's at 6. Final. Unremarkable. Like I was a decision he'd already made and was simply announcing. My mother was standing in the kitchen doorway. I remember that clearly. The yellow dish towel folded over her shoulder. The way she looked at the floor instead of at me. I had just told them I was 3 months pregnant. The boy's name was Derek. We'd been together for almost a year. The kind of high school relationship that feels like the whole world when you're inside it. He wasn't a bad person. He was just 17 too. And when I told him, he went very quiet and then said he needed time to think. I gave him time. He used it to stop returning my calls. By the time I was standing in front of my parents, Derek was already a ghost. My father didn't ask about him. He didn't ask about anything. He said, "You made your choice. Now live with it." And then he told me I had until Sunday to be gone. I want to tell you I said something powerful in that moment. Something that made him pause, that planted a seed of doubt in his certainty. But the truth is I didn't say anything at all. I was 17 and pregnant, and suddenly very aware that the ground I had been standing on my whole life was not solid. I called my aunt from the gas station down the street. My mother's older sister, the one my father had always described as too soft and living in a fantasy, my Aunt Ruth, she answered on the second ring. I didn't even finish explaining before she said, "Come here. Just come here right now." My Aunt Ruth lived 40 minutes away in a small house with a porch that sagged on the left side and a garden. She tended with the kind of dedication most people reserve for things that talk back. She had never married. She had a cat named Biscuit, 3 wind chimes, and more patience than anyone I have ever met before or since. She was 58 years old when she opened her door to a crying 17-year-old with a duffel bag, and a secret she had only just begun to understand was now her entire life. She made me tea. She sat across from me at her kitchen table, and she said, "Okay, tell me everything." So I did. I told her about Derek and the silence that followed. I told her about my father's face and my mother's dish towel and the way Sunday had felt like a countdown to something I couldn't name. I told her I was scared in a way I didn't have language for yet. She listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, she wrapped both her hands around her mug and looked at me for a long moment. "Here's what I know," she said. "You are going to be a mother. That is real, and it is happening, and it is not going anywhere. Everything else your father, Derek, what any of them think, none of that is as real as the thing that's already decided. So we deal with the real thing first." I moved into her spare bedroom that weekend. My son was born in March, 7 pounds and 4 ounces, with my aunt's nose, and my stubbornness already visible in the way he held his jaw. I named him Caleb. My aunt cried. I cried. Biscuit sat on the windowsill and regarded the whole situation with dignified indifference. My parents did not come to the hospital. I had sent my mother a message, one message, the morning after Caleb was born. A single photo. I didn't ask for anything. I just wanted her to see him. She read it. She never replied. I made a decision that week, lying in that narrow hospital bed with Caleb asleep on my chest. I decided I was not going to spend my life waiting for them to come around. I was not going to keep a door open at the cost of my own forward motion. I was going to move. That was all. Just move. My aunt helped me enroll in the GED program when Caleb was 6 weeks old. She watched him in the mornings while I studied. She never made it feel like a favor. She made it feel like Tuesday. "You're going to finish this," she told me once, when I came home after a particularly bad day and sat down at the kitchen table and just stared at the wall. "Not because you have to, because you're the kind of person who finishes things. I've known that about you since you were 8 years old." I passed my GED 4 months later. My aunt made a cake. The woman who changed the direction of my life was named Miss Carver. And I met her at the community college where I enrolled the following fall. She taught Introduction to Legal Studies, a general education course I signed up for, mostly because it fit around Caleb's daycare schedule. I expected to be bored. I was not bored. Miss Carver had been a paralegal for 20 years before she started teaching. She was precise and demanding and had zero tolerance for excuses. And she looked at me one afternoon after class when I'd stayed late to ask a question and said, with no particular ceremony, "You ever thought about going to law school?" I laughed. Actual laughter. The kind that comes out before you have time to decide if it's appropriate. "Law school," I said. "Why not?" "I'm 18. I have a 7-month-old. I'm living with my aunt." She looked at me the way someone looks at a person who has just described a set of facts that are real but not relevant. "So," she said, "what does any of that have to do with law school?" I didn't have an answer. That absence of an answer bothered me for weeks. I took every class Miss Carver taught. I got my associate's degree when Caleb was 2. I transferred to the state university on a scholarship I applied for 4 times before I got it. I majored in political science and graduated in 3.5 years, carrying Caleb on my hip at the ceremony while my Aunt Ruth stood in the audience in a yellow dress and cried so loudly the woman next to her offered a tissue. Miss Carver wrote my law school recommendation letter. I didn't ask her what she said in it. She told me anyway. "I told them you were the most determined student I had taught in 15 years, she said, "and that the only thing standing between you and a courtroom was time." I was 23 when I started law school. I was not the youngest in my class, but I was among the most certain. I knew exactly why I was there. That kind of clarity is rarer than intelligence, and more useful. Caleb started kindergarten the same week I started law school. We celebrated with pancakes, just the 2 of us and my aunt, at the diner 3 blocks from her house. Caleb wore a backpack that was nearly as big as he was. He was very proud of it. "We're both starting school," he told me, with great seriousness. "We are," I said. "Is yours harder?" I thought about it. "Probably," I said. "But yours has better snacks." He considered this a fair trade. Law school was the hardest 3 years of my life, and also, in a strange way, the most clarifying. Everything I had been through, the leaving, the starting over, the years of watching my aunt move quietly through her days with a kind of principled grace, I was still learning to understand. All of it started to feel less like a wound and more like preparation. I learned how systems work and how they fail. I learned that the law, at its best, is just a framework for protecting people who can't protect themselves. I remembered being 17 at a gas station with a duffel bag. I kept that memory somewhere close. I graduated and passed the bar on my first attempt. My aunt came to my swearing-in ceremony. She was 69 by then, moving a little slower, but she sat in the front row in the same yellow dress and looked at me the way she had always looked at me, like I was exactly who she knew I was going to be. I joined the public defender's office the following month. I spent 6 years there. It was hard work, the kind that doesn't end when you leave the building, and it changed me in ways I am still accounting for. I learned to sit with people at their worst moments and not flinch. I learned that most people who end up in front of a judge are not there because they are evil, but because they are desperate, or unlucky, or both. I carried that with me. I was 31 when I was appointed to the bench. The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was standing in my kitchen, Caleb at the table doing homework. My aunt's old cat Biscuit had long since passed, replaced by an equally imperious tabby named Gerald sitting in the window. I heard the words, and had to ask the person to repeat them because my mind had briefly gone somewhere else entirely. I sat down at the table after I hung up. Caleb looked at me. "Mom," he said, "you okay?" "Yeah," I said. "I think so." "What happened?" I told him. He put down his pencil. He looked at me for a moment with those serious eyes that had been serious since he was 5 years old. "So people are going to call you judge now," he said. "Apparently." He nodded, absorbing this. Then he picked up his pencil and went back to his homework. "Cool," he said. My Aunt Ruth passed away the following spring. She went quietly, in the same house she had opened to me 17 years earlier, in the bedroom next to the one where I had first learned that starting over was not the same as giving up. She left me the house, the wind chimes, Gerald, and a letter written in her careful, slanted handwriting that I have read more times than I can count, and will not share here because some things belong only to the people they were meant for. I sat on her sagging porch for a long time after the hospice workers left. It was early evening, the light going gold through the trees she had planted when she first moved in. I thought about everything she had given me, and how none of it had come with a price. How she had simply decided I was worth it, and then never once revisited that decision. I thought about my parents. I had not spoken to either of them in 17 years. Not a call, not a letter, not a moment of accidental contact in the grocery store. My mother had tried twice. In the early years left voicemails I listened to and did not return. After that, silence. I did not know if they knew about Caleb. I did not know if they had tried to find me. I had built my life in the same state but in a different world, and the distance between us had calcified into something that no longer felt like loss. Or so I believed. The letter from their attorney arrived 11 days after my aunt's funeral. I read it twice, standing in the kitchen, Gerald winding between my ankles, before I set it down on the counter and stood very still for a moment. My aunt had been, before she was my aunt, a woman with her own life, her own history, her own accumulated years of work and saving. She had lived carefully and spent modestly and had, over the course of her life, built something. When she died, what she had built became mine. The house, yes, but also the rest of it. The accounts she had maintained since before I was born. The investments made quietly, without fanfare, with the same steady attention she gave her garden. The total was just over $1.4 million. My parents, my father, I suspected, with my mother's silence, as permission, had filed a claim against the estate. Their argument, translated out of legal language, was essentially this. My aunt had been mentally diminished in her final years and had been improperly influenced by me, her caretaker, and therefore, the will should be contested and the assets redistributed to include them as surviving family members. My Aunt Ruth had been sharp as a blade until the week she died. She had written that will herself, with her own attorney, and revised it twice in 10 years, always in the same direction. The claim was without merit, and any attorney worth their license would know it within 5 minutes of reviewing the documents. And yet, I set the letter down, I poured a cup of coffee. I sat at the kitchen table where I had sat at 17 and told my aunt everything, and I thought carefully about what I was going to do. I called my own attorney the next morning. I laid out the facts. She listened without interruption, much the way my aunt always had. And then she said, "This is a straightforward case. They have no standing and no evidence. We'll file the response, and this will be over in a few months." "I know," I said. "Are you all right?" I thought about it. "I'm curious," I said finally, "about what they think is going to happen. I want to be precise about something here, because I think it matters." I did not know which courtroom the case would be assigned to. That is not how the system works. Cases are distributed, and neither party has control over where they land. I had recused myself from cases involving my own legal matters as a standard practice, and I had every intention of doing so in this instance as well. But the assignment came through on a Thursday, and when my assistant placed it on my desk, she looked at it for a moment, and then looked at me and said nothing, because there was nothing appropriate to say. The case had been assigned to my courtroom. My first call was to the Judicial Oversight Office. I laid out the conflict clearly. What I did not know, what their attorney had apparently also failed to research before filing, was that my parents had listed their city of residence as a county outside my jurisdiction when they filed. A clerical decision, perhaps to establish distance. What it meant, technically and procedurally, was that the case had been filed under circumstances that placed it in my courtroom without the automatic conflict trigger that would have rerouted it. The Oversight Office reviewed my disclosure. They reviewed the filing. They came back to me 48 hours later. The case could proceed in my courtroom. Given the nature of the claim, the lack of merit in the filing, and the procedural specifics of how it had been brought, the reviewing panel determined that no prejudice could reasonably result that would harm the opposing parties, that in fact, any other judge would reach the identical conclusion on the merits. The decision was mine. I thought about it for one day. Then I decided to stay on the case. Not out of any desire for a particular outcome. The outcome was predetermined by the evidence, and I knew that. I stayed because I had spent my adult life believing that the law, applied correctly, is the same for everyone, and because there was something I needed to understand, not for the case, but for myself, about who my parents had become in the years since I last saw them. The morning of the hearing, I arrived at the courthouse the way I always do, early, quiet, coffee in hand, the particular stillness of a building before it fills with the day's troubles. I was at my desk reviewing documents when my bailiff knocked and stepped in. "The parties are here," he said. "Both counsel are ready." "Give me 5 minutes," I said. I sat with it for those 5 minutes. the yellow dress my aunt had worn to every ceremony of my adult life, the sagging porch, the wind chimes, the tea at the kitchen table, the way she had said, "Just come here right now," without a single beat of hesitation. Then I stood up, settled my robe, and walked into the courtroom. The room rose. I took the bench. I looked at the plaintiff's table for the first time. My parents had aged. That was my first, simple, purely human observation. My father's hair was white now, his shoulders smaller than I remembered. My mother sat very still, her hands folded on the table, and she was looking at me with an expression I could not immediately read. Their attorney, a man I did not recognize, younger than I would have expected for a case like this, was already on his feet, smoothing his jacket, preparing the performance that he had presumably rehearsed. He looked at the bench. He looked at my face, and something happened in his expression that I have thought about many times since. He knew. He had done his research, or perhaps he had not done it before filing, but he had done it since, and standing in that courtroom he understood all at once the precise nature of the situation he was in. He was a professional. He kept his composure. He opened his mouth. "Good morning, Your Honor," he said. And then he paused, just briefly, and what came out next was quiet and unavoidable. "Good morning, Judge." My mother made a small sound. I did not look at her. I looked at the attorney. "Good morning," I said. "Let's proceed." The hearing took less time than I expected. The claim was exactly as my attorney had described: unsupported, poorly documented, reliant on assertions about my aunt's mental state that no medical record or witness testimony came close to establishing. The attorney for the plaintiff argued competently, but there was nothing to work with, and everyone in the room knew it. I ruled from the bench at the end of the hearing. I was precise, and I was fair, and I applied the law exactly as it was written. The claim was dismissed. The estate remained intact. The will stood. I did not look at my parents when I read the ruling. Afterward, I sat in my chambers for a while with the door closed. Gerald, who had taken to coming to the courthouse on days when Caleb brought him in a long story, was sitting on the couch. I looked at him. He looked at me. "Well," I said. He blinked. My phone buzzed. A text from Caleb. "How'd it go?" I typed back, "Fine." The law worked the way it's supposed to. 3 dots appeared. Then, "Grandma's lawyer called you judge, didn't he?" I smiled at the phone. "How did you know?" "Mom, I've met you." I was walking to my car that afternoon when I heard my name. My real name, not my title. The name from before. I stopped. My mother was standing by the courthouse steps. Alone. She looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I was different, and the scale of things had shifted. She had her hands clasped in front of her, and she was looking at me the way someone looks at a thing they are not sure they have the right to look at. "I thought you'd leave before I could catch you," she said. I waited. "I want you to know," she said, "that coming here today, the lawsuit that was your father's idea. He convinced me it was the right thing, the legal thing, that Ruth had been." She stopped. Started again. I should have said no. I looked at her for a long time. I thought about 17 years. I thought about a photograph sent to a phone that read the message and went silent. I thought about my aunt in her yellow dress. "Why didn't you?" I said. She didn't answer. Maybe she didn't have one. Maybe some answers take longer than a courthouse conversation to arrive at. "I heard you became a judge," she said finally. "We heard that, maybe 4 years ago. Someone from back home mentioned it." "And?" I said. "And your father said it didn't change anything." She looked down at her hands. I thought about calling, a lot of times. I didn't know what I would say. I thought about what my aunt would do, not what she would feel. I knew what she would feel, because she was human and complicated, and had her own relationship with these people that had never been simple. I thought about what she would do. "There's a diner 2 blocks from here," I said. "I have about an hour before I need to be back. If you want to talk, we can talk." My mother looked up. "I'm not promising anything," I said. "I'm not interested in pretending 20 years didn't happen, but I'm also not interested in carrying something I don't have to carry anymore. My aunt showed me that." We walked to the diner. We sat across from each other. We ordered coffee. My father didn't come. I don't know if my mother told him. I didn't ask. We talked for 53 minutes. We didn't solve anything. We didn't undo anything. But somewhere in the middle of it, when my mother described the morning she got the photograph of Caleb and stood at the kitchen sink for an hour afterward without moving, I understood something I hadn't before. Not forgiveness, exactly, but something adjacent to it. The recognition that pain doesn't always come from the absence of love. Sometimes it comes from love that doesn't know how to be useful. That understanding didn't fix the past. It didn't give me back what I had lost, or give Caleb the grandparents he had deserved. But it did something quieter, and I think, more durable. It let me set it down. That evening, I drove to the cemetery where my aunt is buried. I brought 2 things. A cup of coffee from the diner, still warm, because she always said convenience store coffee was an insult to the concept, and a photo of Caleb at his last debate tournament, standing with his trophy and his serious jaw and his borrowed nose, looking exactly like the person he had become. I sat beside her for a while. "We won," I told her. "Of course we won. You kept impeccable records and your attorney was thorough. But we won." The wind moved through the trees. I thought I heard the ghost of a wind chime, though there wasn't one. "I had coffee with Mom today," I said. "I don't know what comes next with that. Maybe nothing. Maybe something small. I think you'd say that small is enough." I set the photo of Caleb against the headstone. "You gave me 17 years," I said. "You gave me a home and a kitchen table and the belief that I was worth finishing something. I don't know how to account for that. I don't think you'd want me to try." I sat there until the light went golden, then purple, then the particular dark blue that comes just before full night. Then I drove home to my son, my ridiculous cat, and the life I had built not in spite of everything, but straight through the middle of it. Some people look at what I came from and call it a comeback story. I don't think of it that way. My aunt never would have called it that. She would have called it a Tuesday.